it's really from the bottom of my heart that I thank you for being here and braving the elements, and for all that you do, and for the stand that you take and will continue to take. Because at these times, people are tested. We are tested for our vision of the future. And here in this country and elsewhere in Europe, there's a struggle, as you said, about the truth and about the future. And we deeply, deeply appreciate your role in this battle. I was thinking to myself, what would have been the right iconic image to project here in response to this travesty with the wall? And of course, the instinctive answer would be, a blown-up bus or some other horror committed in the days before the construction of the security barrier. But that's not the point. The point should be about what security enables in the positive aspect. And so if I was to choose what should be projected here, it would have been the images from Eid al-Fitr this year, which you probably did not see in your newspapers. Because it's very rare that good news are news in the minds of the people who make decisions as to what interests the average reader, unfortunately. But here's the point. About upwards of 1 million Palestinian people use the holiday to come to the beaches of Tel Aviv, or Israel generally, to enjoy themselves on the holiday without a single incident, without a single disruption. The only problem was, I can say this from experience, it was very difficult to find a parking place anywhere within a mile of the beach in Tel Aviv. Very interesting photos of Israelis, Palestinians, Muslim, Christians, Jews on the beach enjoying themselves. It could not have been done 10 years ago, when we were living under a very different set of circumstances. It would have been science fiction, so to speak, for this to be done, because there was no security, and we could not take the risks involved. Today, with the unpleasant, ugly business of a security barrier, we are learning that good fences can make good neighbors, and that we can build up a relationship with our Palestinian neighbors in what we call the bottom-up effort, which is very rarely reported and very rarely discussed, under which we find avenues of cooperation on a daily basis, on a broad range of issues. And you should ask yourself a simple question. How come it is that Ramallah, of all Arab seats of government, and there is a government in Ramallah, is one of the most stable, relatively prosperous, undisturbed by the violence and horrors that have enveloped other neighbors of ours in our immediate area? And a good part of the answer comes from this bottom-up process that we've undertaken in recent years in building up elements of cooperation. This cannot be done unless security is solidified. And so very much against the image that was previously projected in this place, the ability to provide better security is good not only for us. This is not a story about benefit for one side only. The benefits for daily life that flow from the establishment of a security system that works go both ways. Life is different in Netanya. It is also different, very different, in Jenin. It's different in the streets of Jerusalem. It is different in the streets of Ramallah. And those who would have us go back are actually doing a disservice to the very people that they think they are trying to help. This is a broader challenge. I will say, since you are engaged in a conversation with people who think that way, and I salute you for doing so, let me put this in a very simple way. Those who speak of the redemption of the Jewish people, of the return to Zion, of the Zionist project, of Israel as a state, in terms of colonialism or apartheid, are above all doing a tragic disservice to the Palestinian people. Because, to be blunt, what is the meaning of these insults? Leave aside the insults. The Jewish people has lived with insults and taunts for 3,000 years and will continue to live with taunts, I assume, for a few more years to come. That's not the problem. The point is that when you speak of colonialism, when you speak of apartheid, you suggest that this is transitory, like colonialism, which is no longer with us, like apartheid, which, to our gratitude, is no longer with us. So what they are trying to say is, a day will come, in the not too distant future, in which Zionism and the State of Israel will be no more. And those who deliberately, or sometimes because of a misplaced sympathy with those that they deem to be the underdogs, support this kind of language, support this kind of conceptual framework. What they are doing is that they are selling the Palestinian people on a fantasy that will never be realized, because we are in Israel to stay. Yes. We did not have to wait. We did not have to wait for President Obama to come to Israel last March to tell us so, but he did in no uncertain terms, and we appreciate his message. We are there not because of the Holocaust, although we are there to prevent another from happening. We are there because we have returned to an ancestral homeland, which we share with our Palestinian neighbors, which we've come to terms with the idea that we are going to have to share with our Palestinian neighbors, much as Abraham has come to share the land with Lot. If you remember, you go this way, I'll go that way. We understand this, but we are going to be there. And the Zionist project will persist and prosper. And those who sell the Palestinian people on any other expectation and assumption is doing them a tremendous disservice, because it interferes with their ability to come to the necessary compromises that would enable a peace to be achieved. A stable, viable peace to be achieved. Security is part of any future peace agreement, any future arrangement under which we would continue to live together. It has to be. The lesson of the Israeli people from the last 15 years is that if you neglect this, If we neglect this, we do it at our peril. And so when we have fought and won the battle against the suicide bombers, we did so on the basis of a number of things. The barrier, the physical difficulty that we place in the route of the would-be terrorist attackers is part of it. Another part of it, and I'd say this loud and clear, has to do with the resilience of our people. Because how do you deter a suicide bomber? It's not a simple answer. You're going to die, that much they know. The point we had to drive through the resilience of our society was just slightly different. You're going to die for nothing. Because the goal of breaking our spirit, the goal of breaking our resilience is not achieved. And we have succeeded over time in driving this message. This is part of the answer to the question, why has this phenomenon declined so dramatically? At least in our parts. But in order for this resilience to be sustained, in order for the people of Israel to know that their security will be sustained, the government, of course, had to take its own action. Resilience is a function also of your own government doing whatever needs to be done to protect you and to fight back. You know, I'm here in London. Again, I feel at home here. I wrote my PhD here. I lived here for 3 years. There's a debt that we owe to the City of London that can never be repaid for standing up to Nazi aggression and refusing to bow down. But the resilience of the British people through these crucial years was also sustained by the fact that they had a government that was willing to fight back. Yeah. And even at the worst times to go and bomb Berlin on forlorn missions just to send a message. And so the resilience of a people has also to do with the commitment of government to the defense and protection and to fighting back against terror. And I think the lesson that we learned from the experience of London, of wartime Britain, is relevant for what we've been doing over the last few years and the manner in which we won our own battle. But now we have to look towards the future. And in the struggle for the future, of course there will be security dimensions, security elements in the more narrow and specific sense of the word. Physical barriers, positioning of forces, the capacity to act on what they call nowadays actionable intelligence, so that is the knowledge of what the enemy, the terrorists, would be perpetrating. We've been successful in this respect, and we need to sustain our capabilities as part of any future agreement. But that's not the end of the story. Because when we speak of security, we also mean the need for the other side to understand what I've just told you, that we are a legitimate presence in our own land. And here sometimes we face a problem. As you know, Israel has raised the expectation that in the context of any future agreement with the Palestinian leadership, with whom we are now engaged in intense negotiations, they would recognize, we sometimes say the Jewish state. I would put it a bit more precisely. I would recognize that Israel is the legitimate embodiment of the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. It's a bit longer. It's not so sound-bitey, as they say nowadays. But I think it's a bit more accurate. Sadly, the point sometimes is that our Palestinian cousins, and they are our cousins in many ways, find it difficult, or some of them find it difficult to accept the idea that the Jews are a people. They go into all kinds of arguments. Well, Judaism is a religion. Indeed it is. But it is the religion of a people. Whereas, I'll give you one easy example. I used it earlier in another discussion today, but it is relevant. How do our three different calendars work? The calendar here is solar. The months of the modern world are totally artificial. In fact, they are politicized. In case you haven't noticed, poor defenseless February, was robbed of 2 of its days to service Julius and Augustus, the great Caesars. It is entirely, it's a political fix. There is no natural phenomenon related to the month of the year in the Gregorian or Julian calendar. However, as you know, in Islam, the month passed by based upon the lunar cycle. The same is true for Judaism. However, and I know this also happens like the Jewish tradition, also in some East Asian countries. The lunar cycle was modified to work in sync with the solar cycle. Whereas in Islam, as you know, the year is simply 11 days shorter, and the Ramadan and other holidays slide against the solar year. We could not do it in the Jewish tradition. And why is that? Because Passover and the Feast of Weeks and Tabernacles, or what we call Sukkot, are agriculturally related. They are based upon the seasons of the year. Because these were the 3 pilgrimages to Jerusalem, was product of the field. So the rabbis, no computers, no telescopes, but they fixed an additional 7 months over a cycle of 19 years. So these 7 years have 13 months. Like this year, the Jewish year will have 13 months. And this way it continues to work. How is this related to our argument? In a very simple way. They had to fix it because it had to remain related to the agricultural cycle of one land in particular, the land of Israel. It could have worked in Southern California, but they were not. This was not what they meant. In other words, it's true that Judaism is a religion, a revealed religion. But it is the revealed religion practiced by a people and related to a land, the land of Israel. And it is time for these simple 2 words, Jewish people, to come into the Palestinian conversation. Because only this would ensure that what we call mutual recognition of our 2 national movements would provide the long-term security that flows from coming to closure with the idea that they were not fighting a colonial invader, they are not fighting a passing phenomenon. They need to compromise, painful as it is for us, and it is for them, compromise with a fellow national movement of a legitimate people, no more, no less than they are. I'm not going to go into the argument of who was there first and who's more of a people than the other. This is all that we ask. Even Comrade Stalin, God roast his soul, recognized that the Jews are a people. They did try to offer us an autonomous republic in eastern Siberia on the Chinese border called Birobidzhan. I was with Prime Minister Netanyahu when the Prime Minister of Birobidzhan came to visit us and more or less sheepishly admitted that our project was slightly more successful. But they did not, quite frankly, they did not offer autonomous republics in the Soviet system to religions. It was not a Lutheran, although there were plenty of Lutherans. They did not offer a Muslim state, although they offered to Muslim states to Muslim ethnicities. And in very much the same way, they recognized the Jews as a people, one of the peoples of the Soviet Union. That most of them since left the Soviet Union and came to live in their homeland. But the recognition was there right from the beginning. In fact, they did vote back in 1947 in recognition of Israel as the national home of the Jewish people. And so it's time for our neighbors to stop playing games. Sometimes it gets really funny. You know, they are now putting forward the idea that President Truman, God bless him, who understood, you know what he said to the Jews after he left his office, and they honored him for having recognized the state of Israel. He said it in 3 words. He said, "I am Cyrus." He saw himself as the latter-day embodiment of the Persian king who recognized the right of the Jews to return to their land. But the Palestinians put it forward that Truman did not want to recognize the Jewish state. How do they know? Because in the Declaration of Recognition made out within 11 minutes of Israel's Declaration of Independence, he struck out the words Jewish state and wrote Israel instead. So he didn't want to recognize the Jewish state. No, gentlemen. He simply found out that the country has been given a name. And so it was no longer the Jewish state in abstract, but the state of Israel as called by its leaders. So he struck out the Jewish state and wrote Israel because this was the technical change once David Ben-Gurion decided that this would be the name of the new state. But he never intended to retrieve his recognition of the Jews as a people entitled to self-determination. This is the essence. We've recognized the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. It's time for them to do the same. And this is a security issue in the sense that this would put an end to the fantasy that by force, or by pressure, or by boycotts, we can be uprooted from our land ever again. And security matters because we have to change the frame of the discussion. For those of you who face this conversation with people who fail to understand where we come from, I ask you to shift their gaze, their look, their outlook, just a little bit to the north. And stop and think of what is now happening in Syria. And here's a thought. As Israelis, and you as people who care for Israel, there's first of all the normal reaction of every human being to this ongoing horror. This man's inhumanity to man day in, day out for 3 years now. And we are doing what we can in our limited ways. I'm in touch with a number of Israeli NGOs who are now collecting goods, even clipping out the name of Israel so not to embarrass and not to put any of the recipients in a difficulty, to send clothing and beddings to the Syrian refugees in Jordan. But in addition to this basic humanitarian reaction, human reaction, remember that for us, I think for all of us in this room, there's this one extra thought. If this is what they do to their own children, what would ever happen to us if we are too weak to defend ourselves? So we need to reframe the discussion. Look at what is happening. Look at how we are handling our own challenge. And realize that security for Israel means security and prosperity also for our Palestinian neighbors. This is not a zero-sum game. What we've been able to do over the last 10 years, when we turned back the tide of the suicide bombers and the terrorists, has been a service for both peoples. And this is the way we want people of goodwill to understand. And we need, as I said, iconic symbols not only of the past horror, but of future hope for this to sink in and be made to understood by people of goodwill. I'm open for questions. Yes.
My name is Security. Now, the conflict, the obstacle. Just very briefly, look back since Muhammad, or the founder of Islam, he slaughtered Jewish tribes in Medina. And if we go forward to the so-called Golden Age, there was no Golden Age. Non-Muslims, Christians, and Jews, they were treated as to pay jizya tax. So, and when people say education was the key, but 9/11 hijackers were educated. In this country, we had 2 doctors in Glasgow. They tried to blow up the airports. They were doctors, and they were Muslims. So my question is, do you think Islam is the obstacle to peace?
Well, I understand by your name that you are of Iraqi origin. Is Islam as such the obstacle? I'll give you a straightforward answer as I see it. My answer is no. Not Islam as such, but it's modern, some of it today, and at points in the past. The question is, how do you interpret religion and how you use it? I know that there's a challenge here because there are aspects of the Islamic tradition that reflect the fact that from day one it was a state and not only a faith. And therefore, the question of power enters very early into Islamic discourse. The difference between Sunnah and Shia is rooted not just in theological questions, but also from the very beginning in questions of political power. So I'm not unaware of this. But I don't want to be driven into that corner. We have suffered at the hands of Christianity. And still I believe that people of goodwill in the Christian world can embark on a different course. I'll say this very personally. I'm Dutch by marriage. My wife did convert when we married. But she's the granddaughter of rescuers. People who risked their lives and the lives of their 6 children in Holland under the German occupation to hide the Jewish men under their roof. His grandchildren are Christian. The great-grandchildren of his rescuers are my children who are grown Jewish in Israel. So the Lord works in mysterious ways. I can say the same about some very honorable Muslims that I've met. Think of the example of the Imam of Drancy in France, a very significant place because this was the place from where the Jews of France were sent to their death. There is now, as you know, a large Muslim community in France. Imam Shalgumi, the Imam of Drancy, has stood with us at times of testing. I met his delegation when they came during the fighting in November 12 in Gaza to stand with Israel. So I believe that there is nothing preordained. And I would resist the position of Huntington and the Clash of Civilizations. I don't think there's something preordained in Muslim hatred, but there is something preordained in the way in which the people who abuse religion, not Islam, not Muslims, but Islamists. I think in Arabic you say Islamawiyya, not Islam as a religion, but the version, or to be precise, perversion of religion, which marries the religious tradition to the ideas of modern totalitarianism, borrowed from fascism and communism, like the Muslim Brotherhood Creed, like the Hamas Covenant. These have to be battled by their own, by people from the Muslim world who will come to see how destructive this point of view is for their own future. And this is the challenge. And I'm proud, as I said, and I'll say it earlier today on another occasion, and I'll say it again. I'm proud of the fact that in our embassy here, the individual in charge of outreach to civil society is a Muslim and a friend of mine, Ismail Khalid. So some of you, I understand, have met him. So I would stand against the Huntington thesis. I don't see this as preordained. I see this as a struggle, and a struggle that we can ultimately win. I don't believe in lost causes. Germany was once upon a time a cesspool of hate. Today it is a country that represents responsibility. So the transformations are possible. Yes?
Do you seriously believe these talks at this moment are going to achieve a Palestinian state?
I don't know. I don't know. It's up to them to make certain decisions. It's up to us. It's not going to be easy under any circumstances. I don't want to speculate about the chances. But I will say one interesting thing. While we have huge differences on a number of crucial issues, the way the map of the region is now being reshaped by the political upheaval that people very hopefully call the Arab Spring. I would say this term is a bit too flowery and seasonal for my taste. The way in which it is transformed has created a situation under which you have three major camps fighting for the future of the region. I wish there were more liberal voices, but they're marginal. I think the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda types, can kill, but they cannot take power. So the real struggle now is between Iran and its allies, the Muslim Brotherhood and its allies, and the forces that stand against the influence of both. And in this respect, interestingly enough, Israel, Jordan, the Palestinian leadership, the present Palestinian leadership, as well as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, most of the other Gulf states, stand together against a challenge which is common to all of us, that of radicalized Islamism, whether in its Shia variation or its Sunni variation, or Brotherhood variation. So this creates at least a degree of common ground that enables us to continue to negotiate. Yes?
I asked a question a week ago at a parliamentary lobby. We in Britain are meant to be a democracy, as is the United States of America. So how do you have a partner for peace on the so-called West Bank, where the president was elected for 4 years in January 2005 and has not permitted an election since? Even Robert Mugabe has had elections since then, but not Mahmoud Abbas. As for the Hamas leader in Gaza, they still have a charter that demands the total annihilation of
The Jewish people.
So how can Israel waste time pretending to make peace? Why doesn't she just say to John Kerry and Barack Obama, would you have accepted it if George Bush had said in 2008, I'm going to go on. We're not going to hold any elections. We're going to scrap them all. I'm in power, I'm here to stay. Because surely that's what Abbas has done. So why does Israel bother negotiating?
Well, the straightforward answer is because that's what there is on offer. And when we've made our decision, I'll say something which is not easy to accept, but I'll say it nevertheless. When as a people, we've made our decision to go back into the course of history, in the course of politics, and democratic life, it taught us something that Democrats know and dictators normally don't, which is that you have to compromise as you go along. All political results in a democracy are suboptimal. By definition, you know how they say, you don't want to know how to make sausages and laws. It teaches you to modify your expectations, to work within the framework of reality as it is being offered. More specifically on the question of elections. Quite frankly, I think that the capstone of elections in a process of democratic transformation should be last and not first, as you build the arc of stability. It has to rest upon the emergence of civil society, a middle class with a stake in a stable and prosperous and peaceful future, the rule of law, the rights of women, a free press, freedom of expression. These are the building blocks of the arc. An election should come last, not first. The failure of some of the experiments we've seen in our neighborhood. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, I refuse to call it the Middle East. This is an old British colonial term. Us in the Eastern Mediterranean should have been rid of it by now. But in our neighborhood, some of the experiments in premature elections have led to grief, like the Palestinian vote of 2006 that gave these Hamas murderers a majority in parliament. So elections are not the first test I would put forward. We saw efforts to create a more stable Palestinian society. I'm not sure it will succeed. We worked fairly closely with the former Palestinian Prime Minister, Salam Fayyad, who was, I believe, a man of goodwill. It's a comment upon Palestinian politics that his reward for all that he has done for his people was his dismissal. But nevertheless, I think we are seeing some of the building blocks emerging. We need patience, and we need wisdom, and we need the capacity to come to terms with the idea that our decision to return into history will be accompanied by very, very difficult decision. It has been the case from day one, and it will remain the case in the future. Yes?
You say you need patience. John Kerry wants a decision by the next 6 months anymore. And it seems to be a very one-sided decision. The pain for decision seems to be always on Israel's side. The other thing is where I'm very concerned is that the European Parliament has already said any failure, Israel is going to be blamed and Israel is going to suffer. So what would be the answer to that?
I think I'd rather not speak to what's happening around the negotiating table. And much of what you read, I think, is being put forward by interested parties. I think I'd rather wait to see. We're not talking in any case of a decision now, but of the emergence of a framework for further negotiations in the next few weeks. As for the European position, it needs to be fought, but not, and I believe this is a battle we can win. The Speaker of the European Parliament was just in Israel, and he said boycotts are not the way, and there will not be a European boycott of Israel under any circumstances. So that's a useful statement. And let me say, we are not asking our friends to commit to a battle that cannot be won. We believe we can win. Look at this week. I'm not going to mention the heroic stance of Scarlett Johansson. As an example of our diplomacy, that was her own choice, and we salute her for it. But we did engage in conversations, and look what they produced just this week. The largest of the Dutch pension funds decided not to follow its slightly smaller competitor and decided to remain invested in Israeli banks. Israel joined the group of like-minded non-EU Western democracies known by the short and pleasant name of Juscans. That's Japan, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and now Israel. In the UN map of groups. So we are now no longer just a standalone entity. A month ago, we also joined the Western European and others group in another UN framework, the WEOG, and so all this alphabet soup. A couple of years ago, we joined the OECD, a very important framework for our economic growth. And just yesterday, we joined as an observers country, like many others from outside that region, the Alianza Pacifica, the new anti-Bolivarian, anti-Chavez alliance of like-minded Latin American countries, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Peru. And this is a very important stepping stone for us to increase our legitimacy and our trade in that part of the world. So not a bad week for the struggle for legitimization. So we look to you here in this country, which is a crucial battlefield between our detractors and our friends, to carry the battle to a successful resolution. We believe it's possible. Yes?
Good afternoon. I see you are a security advisor.
National security.
Yes. And I read in Job chapter 1, Joshua was given this advice that Israel's borders would be in the south, the Negev desert, in the west, the Mediterranean Sea, in the north, the Lebanon mountains, and the eastern border was going to be the Euphrates River, not the Jordan. Just wondering how you would react to that.
Well, I cannot speak to the fullness of time. But as I said, when we have embarked upon this difficult challenge of building a modern state under modern conditions in a difficult area, we knew right from the beginning that this is going to entail some very difficult decisions. We have had, and this is important for you to know, because soon enough, and I'm going to speak directly to this question of the river. Soon enough, there will be attempts in this country to ask the government of Her Majesty to rescind the Balfour Declaration because it is based on some kind of sin against the Arabs. Now, what most people have failed to learn is that it was made at the time fully compatible with the promise that was made also to the Hashemite family when they rose against the Turks in the Arab rebellion. And this was later enshrined in an agreement between the leader of the Zionist movement at the time, the great Chaim Weizmann, who helped Britain win World War I with his scientific achievements, and Prince Faisal of the Hashemite family. The reason this agreement broke down was that the British government made a contradictory promise, but not between the Jews and the Arabs, but between the Arabs and the French over the future of Syria, and then honored its duty to France for its sacrifices in the war, and did not honor its obligation to the Arabs, which went on to rescind their obligation to the Jewish people at the time. However, over the course of this century since, for most of the century, our relationship with the Hashemite family, the most legitimate of all Muslim families, by the way, because for 1,000 years before the Saudis took it away by force, they were the custodians of the Haramain, of the two holy places. Our relationship with the Hashemite family has mostly been an honorable one. We fought in 48 within limits. I know this because my father was a POW in Jordan. I had an opportunity to tell King Abdullah to his face, with his permission, that if my father said, "Your Majesty, can I say something personally?" And I said, if the Jordanian military back in 48 had not been commanded by, I should say, British trained gentlemen, I probably wouldn't be here. Because my father was treated well and returned safely to his family after 9 months. He was taken from the old city of Jerusalem. You can imagine that in 67, it was not just a sense of national jubilation, it was a personal matter for my family. But the Jordanians, and they were dragged into the war of 67. But within 3 years of that, we were already willing to go to war to defend their survival against the Soviet-backed Syrian invasion. So this understanding with the Hashemite family is one of the foundations of our present policy. And I think it's a wise investment in the future. I think this answers your question.
Sorry,
yes.
my reference was wrong. It's not Job, it was Joshua.
It's Job. I would. There are certain Joshuan practices that I wouldn't apply. Yes. Sir.
I think if you give up Judea and Samaria, Israel will be in deep trouble. You've got to keep that place. You must unjoin the covenant.
I think
if Israel gives that up, you'll be in
More than
danger.
Yeah.
I think our.
Tell us the Israeli government.
I think we don't lack for people telling us. I will say this, that the tremendous effort against the run of a long history of powerlessness, we've built a powerful state. Some people rate us among the powerful nations of the world. I think it gives me the shivers to think how far we've traveled in 70 years from utter powerlessness. And as one of the great rabbis of modern North America, Rabbi Yitzhak Gimbel, once said, after what happened, Jewish powerlessness is an immoral state. So we've been able to build a powerful state with powerful capabilities. And we will make our own judgment as to what security risks we can take safely and what we cannot. Yes.
What efforts is the Israeli government going to make to win the propaganda war, which I think it has been losing for years?
Well, perhaps we've trusted too much to our, what they call nowadays in America, our hard power, and not enough in our soft power efforts. I think we need to do much more.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, you know the public domain nowadays. You know how we are all wired. You know what it means when a person walks upright nowadays? It means he lost his cell phone. In this cyberspace war, in this public domain war, governments can do little. Because there is an innate tendency to suspect what governments say for themselves. So we need youth at the forefront of the battle. It may not be fair, but that's the way the world is wired now. We need people of goodwill to be at the forefront of the battle, because the average bloke doesn't trust messages from governments. And this is why we need, how shall I put it, Jongos and Congos to fight the Gongos. Let me explain. Palestinians have been following an innovation that emerged, I think, first in Cuba, which we call a Gongo. Governmentally organized non-governmental organizations. So we need Jewishly organized non-governmental organizations and Christian organized non-governmental organizations to fight off the Gongos of this world who seek to do us harm. Yes?
Touching on a few other points, and being a Sabah myself, so I'm born there, I'm born in Sabah. My sister's out
Same
there
here.
right now.
Same here.
My sister's out there right now. She lives on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. I've got a best friend that's just gone into the army. So I know what's going on, and that's the irritating thing, because the facts aren't coming out. They're not. So when people think with what's going on in Syria, people don't realise that people are being taken into Israeli hospitals in northern Israel.
Right. They've got some coverage, less here than
It's
in
minimal to what it
North
should
America,
be.
but you're right.
When it comes to fighting the boycotts, if you were to ask people, do they go into a hospital and have heart surgery and use heart machines? They say yes. But ask them why. Everyone has a mobile phone these days. SIM cards? Come on.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. Ideas in people's minds change much slower than the reality they face. So we need to be patient, but that doesn't mean we should not work very hard to bring things to people's attention. Write letters, write essays, organize groups, bring people face to face with the reality of Israel, because ultimately this is what works.
And also tell them the fact that actually within the Israeli parliament, everyone knows about a coalition here. Hello, the Israeli parliament is a huge coalition in itself.
And a very acrimonious place, as usual.
No one seems to forget about it.
Well, as you know, we have our own differences. Perhaps the most constitutional of all Jewish jokes is the old story about the quarrel in the synagogue in the middle of Yom Kippur, the highest of all holy days. And half the synagogue were shouting that the practice of prayer should be this way, and half were shouting it should be that way, and they could not continue. And then they had the idea that maybe we should go to the old rabbi. He will remember what is the true tradition. He is so weak by now, he's 100, he doesn't come to the synagogue anymore. We should go home and to his home and ask him. So off goes the delegation, they knock on his door, he comes out. What is the matter? They say, Rabbi, half are shouting this and half are shouting, what is the true tradition? He said, this is the true tradition. Half are shouting this. So it's not easy to make the story of Israel come out and half are shouting this and half are shouting that. But the effort is still worth it. Keep on trying. One more question?
As a national security advisor, how do you see the position developing in the Gulf states, who have all the money and are obviously funding all the propaganda?
Well, things change. And nowadays, if you ask the Saudis, who in the world looks upon things in a way very close to their own concerns, there's nobody from the media within earshot. They'll say, Israel. Will this change their practices in funding madrasas of hate and propaganda? Not immediately. But the situation is today far more complicated, far more dynamic, and has some positive aspects that were not out there in the past, because they are worried sick about Iran. So are we, for very good reasons. And that creates a commonality at the highest level of priorities that may have a positive impact over time.
I'm so pleased to have you present for an hour just fascinating information from first-hand knowledge of Dr. Lerman. I want to thank you. And before I
thank you all for what you have.
Thank you. I just wanted to interject from our brother's question about education, because we've had this meeting here at St. James because we believe that education within the Christian community is vital. And I can tell you courses such as this, told St. James we were going to promote a Christian course which teaches about Israel. And this course has changed the mind within the last 3 years of 5 British National Party members who came on this course, who were not Christians but came here and are now giving financially to Israel because of education within the Christian community. And I can tell you that church leaders are changing their minds because we are educating them. And people who have been, like myself, and stayed down in the south in Sterot, and I was in Maxime's restaurant the evening before the bombing, and I interviewed people in the hospital the following day, and are able to take that information to the Christian communities, are actually getting the message through so that your voice can be heard. So we are making gains in here, and to be able to send your message out through the internet, I know that more people's minds will be changed. So the value of your talk today is immense, and Thank you.